murder trial of Karmelo Anthony ended with a heavy 35-year sentence, but a completely new legal battle is erupting right now over the physical evidence that actually decided the case. Jeff Metcalf, the father of 17-year-old Austin Metcalf, is publicly demanding that the official track meet surveillance and cell phone video footage be released to the public. Online, thousands are asking a very simple question. If this video was the defining piece of evidence in the courtroom, why is it completely missing from the internet? Is the court hiding something suspicious, or is this just standard legal protocol? Today, we are breaking down the exact demands made by Austin's father, the real reason the court hasn't published the video online, and the harsh legal realities of the sentencing. If you want the unfiltered truth behind the headlines, please hit subscribe to U.S. Crime Cases right now. We break down the facts, no lies. 35 years in state prison. Wow. That is the exact sentence handed down to 19-year-old Karmelo Anthony after a Collin County jury rejected his self-defense claim for the fatal track meet stabbing. But while the headlines focus entirely on that final verdict, a deeper look at the courtroom records reveals a tragedy where everyone shared a piece of the blame. From the teenagers' fatal choices to failing school protocols and the court's strict application of the law, this wasn't a single isolated incident. It permanently altered multiple families. To understand the severity of this outcome, you really first have to look at the hard legal numbers governing Texas adult sentencing parameters. Karmelo Anthony was 17 years old at the time of the incident, but the court said he would be tried and convicted as an adult. Because the weapon used was a knife and the conviction secured was first-degree murder, the state of Texas classifies this as an aggravated offense. Under the law, Anthony must serve a mandatory minimum of 50% of his sentence before he is legally eligible to apply for parole. Right, the math is absolute here. He will serve exactly 17 and a half years behind bars before a parole board will even review his file. The institution of the Texas prison system does not shield an offender just because of their youth at the time of the crime. Anthony enters a maximum security state prison alongside adult offenders. He will spend his 20s and early 30s in total isolation from the outside world. This is the numeric reality of a 35-year sentence. The prime adult years of a 19-year-old's life are legally forfeit. But even with that decades-long sentence handed down, the story isn't over. Let's look exactly at what Jeff Metcalf is asking for. Austin's father has made it explicitly clear that the family wants the official surveillance and any cell phone footage used in court to be unsealed and released to the public. I see why people might wonder why a grieving father would want such a traumatic video out there, but his exact reasoning is straightforward. He wants to stop the rumors. On platforms like TikTok and X, people who never sat in the courtroom are constantly speculating about who started the fight and whether it was truly self-defense. Jeff Metcalf told the court that releasing the footage will show the absolute truth of what happened to his son, allowing the public to see the exact evidence that led 12 jurors to a unanimous guilty verdict. He stated that he wants the world to see the unedited reality of what happened under that team tent. He believes this is the only way to preserve his son's memory and put an absolute end to public speculation. When you lose a child, having strangers online rewrite the narrative of their final moments is a completely different kind of pain. He wants the truth out there, raw and unedited. This sentence and the father's demand all trace back to a 10-second physical escalation under a stadium tent. To remain strictly balanced, we have to look at the physical, measurable actions of both teenagers based on what the court records show. During a rain delay at the track meet, students crowded under a pop-up tent to stay dry. According to witness testimony, Austin Metcalf, who stood 6'1" and weighed 215 pounds, confronted Anthony, who stood 5'8" and weighed just 130 pounds. The state presented evidence that Metcalf and his peers demanded Anthony leave the area up to 15 times. Witnesses told investigators that they repeatedly asked him to step out from under the Memorial High School team tent. The defense argued that Metcalf physically initiated the violence. Witnesses confirmed in court that Metcalf delivered a forceful, two-handed shove to Anthony, pushing the seated teenager backward into the metal bleachers. It was described as a territorial display over a bench seat. According to police records, Anthony reached into his bag before this and warned people not to touch him. Then the shove happened. However, the legal mistake that cost Anthony his freedom happened in the seconds immediately following that push. Under the law, you cannot meet a non-lethal push with a lethal weapon. Police said Anthony chose to carry a hidden 3.5-inch folding pocket blade into a public school track meet. When the physical space opened after the shove, Anthony did not retreat. Instead, he pulled out the folding knife. He deployed a force multiplier, driving the blade 2.5 inches into Metcalf's chest. The medical examiner testified that the blade pierced Metcalf's heart. Both teenagers allowed impulsive decisions to dictate an interaction that cost one his life and the other his freedom. This brings up a really critical legal debate. Was the 35-year sentence proportional? If an unarmed varsity athlete initiates a physical assault by shoving a smaller, seated teenager backward against metal bleachers, does a decades-long prison sentence correctly weigh the shared fault of the escalation? Well, the truth is found in the Texas proportionality standard. The law requires deadly force to be a proportional response to an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. The moment Anthony introduced a deadly weapon into a hands-on fistfight, the legal protection of self-defense vanished. Why? Because the threat he faced from the push was non-lethal. The jury ruled strictly on the written law, entirely separate from the physical mismatch between the two teenagers. The court said the actions simply did not meet the legal standard for self-defense. Let's talk about what it actually means to sit in that courtroom. You have to imagine the environment. The families of both boys were present throughout the 7-day trial. On one side of the aisle, you have Jeff Metcalf and his family, forced to relive the worst day of their lives over and over again. Every time that surveillance video was played, they had to watch their son's final moments. It takes an incredible amount of strength for a father to stand up after experiencing that and ask for the video to be made public. He told the court that his boys were not bullies. He completely rejected the defense's narrative that his son was an aggressor who deserved what happened. He expressed that his grief had transformed into pure, unfiltered rage. But he was also clear that this was never about race or background. He stated it was purely about right and wrong. On the other side of the courtroom, Karmelo Anthony's family watched as their teenager faced decades in an adult prison. They listened as police body cam footage was played. That body cam video shown during the trial captured Anthony visibly upset right after the stabbing. In the footage, Anthony was heard stating, "He put his hands on me. I told him not to." For his family, they watched a narrative unfold where their son felt cornered, reacted in fear, and essentially threw his entire life away in a matter of seconds. Wow, it is just a devastating reality all around. There are no winners when the gavel comes down, just a lot of shattered lives. This circles us right back to the father's demand and the internet's obsession with the missing video. Many people on social media are asking if the lack of an online video is suspicious. Did the jury even see a video at all? The answer is yes. The footage was a central piece of the state's case, and it was played multiple times inside the Collin County courtroom. It was not hidden from the judge. It was not hidden from the defense. The prosecution showed it, and the jury watched it closely. They had to weigh the visual timing on that unreleased video against the testimonies of the students standing just feet away. It is absolutely not missing from the legal record. So why isn't it online for us to share and analyze right now? I know it feels like information is being hidden, but it really comes down to standard Texas judicial protocol. Because Karmelo Anthony's legal team filed a notice of appeal on June 10th, the case is technically still active. Under Texas open records and evidence management rules, the court clerk is legally required to hold all physical evidence and exhibits in a secure vault. Releasing trial exhibits to the public while an appeal is pending can heavily compromise future legal proceedings if a retrial is ever ordered. It isn't a conspiracy. The court said it is standard procedure to protect the integrity of the appellate system. If that footage goes viral online, it could permanently taint the local jury pool. If the appellate court grants Karmelo Anthony a new trial due to some procedural error, it could become nearly impossible to find 12 unbiased jurors who haven't already seen and analyzed the footage on social media. The justice system has to weigh the public's right to see evidence against the strict requirement to protect a clean retrial environment. When we look back at the actual location of the tragedy, a high school track meet, it adds another layer of gravity to the situation. Track meets are supposed to be safe community events. Parents drop their kids off expecting them to compete, hang out with friends, and come home. The rain delay that forced everyone under the Memorial High School team tent created a tightly packed, tense environment. The state presented that Anthony, who went to a different high school, sat under this specific tent. When teenagers are confined in a small space and tribalism kicks in regarding team areas, tensions can flare. Pushing and shoving happens. But the fatal flaw was the introduction of a weapon into a school zone. Police said the folding knife was brought onto the athletic grounds concealed in a bag. We have to really think about the precedent this sets. The court made a very firm statement with this 35-year sentence. They are sending a message that bringing a deadly weapon to a school event and using it to settle a physical altercation will not be treated as a simple teenage mistake. But that brings us back to Jeff Metcalf's plea to the public. He asked the world to stop exploiting his son's death. He confronted organizers and online personalities who tried to use this tragedy to push their own agendas. He made a promise that he would continue to fight for his son's truth. Because Anthony will be eligible for parole in 17 and a half years, the father stated that if he is not alive to attend that parole hearing, he will formally record a video to be played to the board to ensure his demands are met and his son is not forgotten. Right, so when you piece all of this together, the strict Texas sentencing laws, the chaotic 10 seconds under the rain tent, the testimonies of traumatized high schoolers and a grieving father begging for transparency, you get a much clearer picture of why this case has gripped the public. People want the video because they want certainty. They want to see with their own eyes who was right and who was wrong. But the legal system doesn't operate on public curiosity. It operates on procedural law. The video remains locked away in a clerk's vault. And until the appeals process runs its absolute course, the sworn testimonies and the jury's verdict are the only official truth we have. So since that official video isn't public yet, how do we actually know what went down in those crucial seconds? We have to look closely at the sworn testimonies of the people who were actually there. And when we talk about these witnesses, we are mostly talking about high school teenagers. You really have to imagine the emotional weight of this trial. Putting student athletes on a witness stand in a murder trial is incredibly heavy. They are traumatized. They are sitting in a silent courtroom right in front of the family of their deceased classmate and just feet away from the family of the teenager accused of his murder. During the trial, multiple student athletes who were standing nearby when it happened had to testify. They were asked to pull up their darkest memories and describe a fast-moving, incredibly chaotic scene that unfolded under the team tent during a rain delay. If you think about a high school track meet, it's usually a community event. Parents are in the stands, kids are hanging out eating snacks, waiting for their events. But when that rain delay hit, everyone scrambled. Witnesses from both schools stated that the Memorial High School pop-up tent became crowded and tense. When you cram a bunch of hyped-up athletes into a small, dry space, tribalism sometimes kicks in. Witnesses told investigators that a verbal dispute started over seating and space. It wasn't an immediate brawl, it was a verbal back and forth that quickly turned into a physical altercation involving shoving. Witnesses told investigators that Austin Metcalf and some other students specifically asked Karmelo Anthony to leave the tent area. They were telling him he didn't belong under their school's tent. Now, according to police records, Anthony didn't just pack up and walk away. He reached into his bag and issued a warning. He warned the people crowding around him not to touch him. I see how a teenager sitting alone might feel the need to posture or protect his space, but in that specific second under the tent, That warning just raised the temperature of the entire argument to a boiling point. Witnesses stated that Metcalf then pushed Anthony. It was described as a forceful shove that knocked the seated teenager back into the metal bleachers. Police said Anthony subsequently pulled out a folding knife and stabbed Metcalf once in the chest. Wow. Just think about how fast that happened. In the time it takes to take a breath, a physical shove turned into a fatal wound. A normal high school sporting event turned into a homicide scene. If you haven't subscribed to U.S. Crime Cases yet, hit that button right now to support our deep dives into the truth of the courtroom. Once the trial started, the prosecution knew they had to prove this wasn't just a tragic accident or a justified defense. They relied heavily on physical evidence to make their case to the jury. The prosecution presented the physical weapon, showing the court that a 3.5-inch folding knife was intentionally brought onto the public athletic grounds in the first place. That detail matters so much under the law. You don't accidentally bring a weapon to a school event. Then came the medical examiner's testimony, which is always one of the hardest parts of any murder trial for a family to sit through. The medical examiner detailed the exact nature of the injuries. They explained the trajectory and depth of the single stab wound. Prosecutors used these clinical, devastating details to directly counter the defense's argument. They painted a very clear picture to the jury. Bringing a blade to a school event and using it to pierce someone's heart is a completely disproportionate response to being pushed. But we really have to look at the other side of the aisle, because the defense team fought hard for Karmelo Anthony. They didn't just roll over. The defense argued that Metcalf had absolutely no legal right to use physical force to eject Anthony from that public area. It was a taxpayer-funded school event. Anthony had a right to be out of the rain. They claimed that Anthony acted in pure self-defense. Their narrative focused on a smaller 130-pound teenager who was surrounded, verbally confronted, and physically assaulted by a much larger athlete. From the defense's perspective, Anthony warned them to stay back, and when Metcalf crossed that physical boundary and shoved him, Anthony reacted in fear for his own safety. Right? So put yourself in the jury box for a second. You have an incredibly heavy burden on your shoulders. You have the defense saying it is a textbook case of self-defense against an unprovoked physical assault. You have the prosecution saying it is straight up murder because you cannot legally meet a non-lethal shove with deadly force. The jury had to sit there and weigh the visual timing on that unreleased video against the emotional, sometimes conflicting testimonies of the traumatized students standing just feet away. They had to watch the footage over and over, tracking the exact milliseconds between the shove and the strike. Ultimately, after looking at all the evidence, the jury found the actions did not meet the strict legal standard for self-defense. They decided that the force used was not justified, and they handed down the guilty verdict. And that verdict brings us right back to the massive debate that is exploding online today. What are the actual dangers, and what are the benefits if the court finally grants the father's wish and releases that video right now? Supporters of the Metcalf family are incredibly vocal about this online, and I see where they are coming from. They argue that transparency is the absolute best medicine for a grieving, confused community. When something this tragic happens in a town, rumors spread like wildfire. They believe that public access to the video will instantly end the online conspiracy theories. You know how social media works today. People who weren't within 100 miles of that track meet are making videos, writing threads, and dissecting rumors about who the real bully was. It is exhausting and painful for the family. Supporters of the Metcalf family argue the video will show the world exactly why that 35-year sentence was handed down. They argue the public has a fundamental right to see what happened. After all, this didn't happen in a private home. It happened at a public high school sporting event, surrounded by the community's children. They want the truth out there, unedited and raw, so Austin's name isn't dragged through the mud by internet detectives who don't know the facts. However, legal experts are heavily warning the public of the dangers. The justice system is cold, and it operates strictly on rules, not on public sentiment or a family's grief. If the footage is released and goes viral, it could permanently taint the local jury pool. And you have to understand, because of the appeal that was filed, this case is technically still open. Think about the long game of the appellate system. If the appellate court reviews Karmelo Anthony's conviction and finds that a procedural error occurred during the trial, maybe the judge gave an improper instruction or a piece of evidence wasn't handled correctly, they could grant him a brand new trial. If that happens, the court has to find 12 new people in that specific county to sit on a jury. If the stabbing video is plastered all over X, TikTok, and YouTube, it becomes nearly impossible to find 12 unbiased jurors who haven't already seen it, analyzed it, and formed a hard opinion based on social media commentary. This raises a really crucial, uncomfortable question that the justice system wrestles with every single day. Does the public's right to see evidence and a grieving father's desperate need to clear his son's name from toxic internet rumors outweigh the legal system's absolute requirement to protect a clean retrial environment? We are watching a real-time collision between a father's pain and the cold mechanics of the court. And right now, the court is keeping the vault locked tight, right? So when you look at all of that legal strategy and the strict rules of the courtroom, you have to take a breath and step back from the legal arguments for a minute. The reality of this case leaves just a devastating picture for both sides. I see people arguing in the comments section of different articles, taking sides like it's a team sport. But when you look at the human element here, there are absolutely no winners. For the Metcalf family, they are facing the permanent, agonizing absence of a 17-year-old son. You really have to put yourself in their shoes to even begin to understand the depth of that pain. Austin went to a normal, everyday high school track meet. It was a school event. Parents drop their kids off at these things, fully expecting them to come home tired, maybe hungry, but safe. Instead, the Metcalf family received the worst phone call a parent can ever imagine. They had to bury their child. And now they have to wake up every single morning in a house that is too quiet, walking past an empty bedroom, knowing all the milestones Austin will never get to reach. No graduation, no college drop-off, no adult life. That is why Jeff Metcalf is fighting so hard. He told the court he wants that official video released because his grief has turned to unfiltered rage against the rumors. He wants the world to look at the undeniable truth of what happened to his son. Then you look across the aisle. For the Anthony family, the reality is a completely different kind of nightmare. But it is a nightmare all the same. They are watching their 19-year-old son spend his youth inside a state prison facility. The court said he has to serve 35 years, and the law states he has to complete at least 17 and a half years before he is even eligible for a parole review. Wow. Just think about the weight of that time. He went under that team tent as a teenager, and if he serves his minimum, he will be in his late 30s before he has a chance to walk outside as a free man. His family is now locked into a cycle of visitation glass, brief phone calls, and waiting on a lengthy appeal process that could take years to even get a hearing. They lost their son to the system in the span of a 10-second physical escalation. And we can't forget the other teenagers who were there. The students who testified, they went to a track meet and ended up as the key witnesses in a murder trial. They had to watch a classmate die right in front of them under a rain tent. That kind of trauma strips away your innocence. The entire community of Frisco, Texas has been altered by this. You know, when I look at all the facts, this tragedy carries such an urgent, heavy message for any parents and teenagers watching this right now. We really have to take a hard look at how we are raising kids to handle conflict. We must teach our kids to actively de-escalate tense situations and firmly reject bullying behavior. If someone is sitting alone and they ask you to leave them alone, or if they say, "Don't touch me," you have to respect that boundary. The police said the witnesses confirmed Anthony gave a verbal warning before the physical shove happened. We have to teach teenagers that walking away from a verbal argument isn't a sign of weakness. It is a sign of maturity. You don't have to win every argument. You don't have to defend a bench seat under a tent with your pride. But more importantly, and I cannot stress this enough, Parents must have serious, uncomfortable conversations with their teens about weapons. We have to talk about never carrying knives, weapons, or harmful items into school zones or athletic events. I know some teenagers might think carrying a pocket knife makes them look tough, or maybe they carry it out of genuine fear of being picked on. But the law does not care about your teenage logic once that weapon is used. The prosecution proved that a deadly weapon was brought into a school environment. The moment you introduce a blade into a physical fistfight, you cross a legal line that you can never step back from. An instant of anger, an instant of panic, or an instant of fear can result in an irreversible action that alters lives forever. The teenagers under that tent had milliseconds to make a decision. One chose to physically shove another person into metal bleachers. The other chose to reach for a lethal weapon instead of running away. Both choices were catastrophic. You have to teach your teens to recognize when an environment is turning hostile. Give them the script and the confidence to walk away immediately the exact moment they feel unwanted or the moment they detect danger. Tell them to just leave. Leaving a volatile situation is not backing down. It is not losing face. It is the choice that keeps you alive, and it is the choice that keeps you free. If both of these boys had just walked away from that tent when the argument started, Austin would be getting ready for his future, and Karmelo wouldn't be sitting in a maximum security prison cell. This case is going to be talked about for a very long time, mostly because of there's demand for the video. Jeff Metcalf made a promise to the court and to the public. Because Anthony will be eligible for parole in 17 and a half years, the father stated that if he is not alive to attend that hearing, he will formally record a video to be played to the parole board. He is making sure his demands are met, and his son is never forgotten. That is the enduring power of a father's love, mixed with an incredible amount of pain. So I turn the question over to you. What do you think about Jeff Metcalf's demand? When a tragedy like this strikes, should trial videos be made public immediately so the community can see the truth for themselves, or should they remain sealed in the clerk's vault during an appeal to protect the judicial process? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Keep it respectful. Thank you so much for staying till the very end. If you value the truth, please hit subscribe. I appreciate you watching this video today.